Did you really think someone like you belongs in our sacred fellowship hall with that dollar store purse? Karen Whitaker's voice sliced through Gracewood Community Church like a sharpened blade on Sunday morning, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing directly at my faded Walmart tote bag. She bumped my folding chair hard with her designer heel, sending my styrofoam coffee cup crashing across the polished linoleum floor while 30 women's ministry members gasped behind their designer mugs. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I knelt to mop up the spill, feeling every pair of eyes in the fellowship hall burning holes through my thrift store cardigan while whispers spread faster than the coffee puddle. My name is Emma Thompson, single mother to 10-year-old Noah, and I had been attending Gracewood Community Church every Sunday for 3 long years despite Karen's systematic campaign to make me feel like an intruder in God's house. The very first time she targeted me happened during new member orientation class when she controlled the name tag table near the sanctuary doors. "Dear, next Sunday please wear something that doesn't scream charity bin pickup," she announced loudly enough for the entire welcome team to hear, deliberately skipping my name tag while handing glittery ones to women in athleisure wear. Noah stood beside me clutching his Bible coloring book, his small face flushing red as several deacon wives chuckled softly into their programs. Just 3 months later during Wednesday night potluck dinner, Karen escalated her attacks in the church kitchen serving line where steam rose from casserole dishes. "Leave the desserts for families who actually tithe to support this ministry, Emma," she hissed while physically blocking my access to the brownie tray with her body. She swept my $3 Jell-O salad directly into the trash bin right in front of Noah, who clutched his paper plate so tightly it crumpled while 2 pastors' wife friends watched without intervening. Karen then rearranged her homemade pecan pie to the center of the VIP table, 4 board members, smiling triumphantly as if she owned the entire potluck budget. Christmas pageant signups brought her boldest strike yet in front of parents and children rehearsing under sanctuary spotlights. "Some volunteers should stick strictly to nursery cleanup duty because image really matters for parent volunteers," she declared publicly while crossing my name off the stage crew list with a flourish. Noah overheard everything from the back pew where he waited, later asking me in the parking lot why the mean church lady hated our family so much. I folded costumes alone that night under buzzing fluorescent lights, listening to her laughter echo through the halls. Karen ruled Gracewood like an unofficial queen, controlling front pew assignments for prayer warriors, women's ministry board seats, and even preferred parking spots nearest the entrance doors. Last Easter Sunday she sent a group email to every women's ministry member stating clearly that greeters needed presentable appearance standards required without exception. She CC'd a photo of my thrift store cardigan from the previous week, captioned with 3 laughing emojis while Noah stopped wanting to attend Sunday school altogether. Everyone admired her perfect Christian facade, floral dresses every service, pearl earrings matching her silk scarves, husband serving as finance committee chairman for over a decade. But every single time she sneered about my widow poverty aesthetic or Noah's hand-me-down church clothes, I bit my tongue to hide a secret smile. I kept returning week after week, nodding through every calculated insult during flower arrangements and tithe-counting sessions. Because while Karen started through Gracewood arranging centerpieces and scolding volunteers like hired help, I quietly held notarized documents from a downtown attorney's office that controlled far more than seating charts or potluck priority. Back then, with coffee soaking through my skirt and Karen's mocking laughter echoing overhead, I had no idea someone would soon walk through those sanctuary doors carrying papers that would dismantle her entire kingdom brick by brick. Prayer requests are for real struggles. Emma, not your endless financial drama every week. Karen's voice rang out across the women's Bible study circle Monday morning, sharp enough that even the ladies at the coffee table went quiet mid-pour. She stood in the doorway with her leather-bound study Bible hugged to her chest like a badge, blocking the light from the hallway while every head slowly turned toward me on the ugly floral couch. My throat tightened as I closed my notebook, feeling the heat crawl up my neck while Noah sat in the corner coloring a picture of the church building. The pastor's wife shifted in her chair and pretended to shuffle pages in her workbook instead of meeting my eyes. "Let's stay focused on the lesson," she murmured weakly, but Karen had already seized the moment and the room. After group prayer, when the others drifted toward the pastry table, Karen stepped right into my path near the doorway. Her perfume was overpowering at that distance, all sharp flowers and money. "Maybe skip sharing next week," she whispered with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Some of us are actually trying to grow spiritually, not host a charity telethon." My hand brushed the frayed strap of my tote bag, and for a second I had to lock my knees so I would not wobble in front of her. On Tuesday afternoon, the humiliation moved to the church parking lot, where the winter sun bounced off windshields and made everyone squint. I pulled my dented Corolla into a spot near the back, hoping to slip in for Noah's midweek kids program without attracting attention. Karen's silver Lexus rolled past slowly, then stopped right beside us with her window sliding down in one smooth motion. "Some widows use the insurance money to upgrade at least their car," she called out loudly, glancing pointedly at my rusted door. "But I guess contentment is a choice." A few parents nearby pretended to look at their phones while clearly listening, and Noah sank down in his seat until his chin almost disappeared into his jacket. "Mom, is our car embarrassing God?" he asked quietly when Karen finally drove off toward her reserved spot near the entrance. The way he said our car made my heart twist worse than her words ever could. I forced a smile and smoothed his hair back. "God does not care what we drive, buddy," I said, though my face burned as we walked past Karen laughing with two deacons' wives under the awning. She did not even glance our way as we slipped inside. Thursday evening brought the worst scene yet, this time in the fellowship hall with fluorescent lights humming and kids running between tables. The church was hosting a family praise night, which really meant Karen's circle sat together at the best tables while everyone else filled the edges of the room. Noah and I carried two paper plates toward an empty spot when Karen stood up abruptly, blocking us with her body and a forced smile. "Oh, Emma, this table is kind of reserved for families who are invested in the ministry," she said, tapping her finger on the donation envelope sitting in front of her place. Her voice carried just enough to hush the nearby chatter. "There are some open seats near the kitchen. That might be more comfortable for you." Her friends stared down at their plates, cheeks pink, but no one told her to stop. Noah's face crumpled as he looked at the table full of kids his age laughing with their mothers, then down at the lonely spot she was pointing toward in the back corner. On the way home, the car felt too quiet. Noah kicked the back of my seat lightly, not in anger, just restless. "Why does she always move us to the back, Mom?" he asked, voice small. "Did we do something wrong?" My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles white in the glow of the dashboard. I swallowed the urge to turn around and drive back just to scream in Karen's perfect face. Instead, the next morning I drove somewhere I had not visited in months, the old brick county building downtown, where the air always smelled like paper and dust. I walked up the marble steps with my heart pounding and Noah's worried questions still echoing in my head. The clerk behind the glass window looked up when I slid a folded note through the slot with my grandmother's full name and the year 1987 written on it. "Property records," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. specifically anything connected to Gracewood Community Church. The clerk typed for a while, then disappeared into a back room and returned with a thin beige folder and a heavy, leather-bound book that looked older than I was. He flipped to a section near the middle and turned it toward me. There, stamped and sealed in faded ink, was my grandmother's signature staring up at me from a deed I had only seen once before in a lawyer's office. Thompson Family Trust, it read at the top in firm, typed letters. Below it, the description of the parcel of land Gracewood now sat on, along with the words long-term lease agreement. I carried certified copies out of the building in a plain manila envelope, the papers warm from the copier and heavy in my hands despite their thinness. That night I hid the envelope in my bedroom closet behind a box of Noah's old baby clothes, my heart racing like I had just stolen something instead of reclaiming what was already mine. When Noah asked what was wrong, I just kissed his forehead and told him we were safe. On Sunday afternoon, a message pinged in the church group chat that made my stomach drop. Emergency congregational meeting next Friday, it read. Budget crisis. Some members' lack of contribution is affecting everyone. At the bottom, in her usual flourish, was Karen's name and 3 exclamation points. I stared at the screen, then at the closet where the envelope sat hidden in the dark. Back then, holding those certified copies with my grandmother's name on them, I still had no idea how far Karen was willing to go, or how the envelope in my closet would turn a simple budget meeting into a night the whole congregation would never forget. Some people keep taking from this church like it is a charity buffet, and quite frankly, we are all tired of carrying certain dead weight. Karen's voice boomed through the fellowship hall microphone on Friday night, echoing off the beige walls as if God himself had handed her the sound system. She did not say my name, but her eyes locked on me so deliberately that half the congregation turned their heads to follow her gaze. I felt Noah's small hand tighten around my wrist under the table as plastic cups rattled with every word she spit into the mic. We were supposed to be at a routine budget update, but the way Karen paced the stage in her navy dress and pearls made it feel more like a trial. She clicked to a slide labeled Giving Shortfall in giant red letters, then to another marked Program Cuts. When some families refuse to contribute fairly, their children benefit from ministries paid for by others, she announced, each syllable sharp as glass. Is that really Christian? Her manicured finger traced columns of numbers that only told half the story, and I knew everyone could see the line labeled Anonymous Lease Payment without understanding what it meant. After the meeting, she made sure the hallway became a gauntlet. As Noah and I tried to slip out the side door, Karen intercepted us near the coat rack, flanked by 2 deacons like she had hired bodyguards from the finance committee. Emma, a word, she said, her smile so tight it looked painful. One of the deacons held a printed sheet with my name highlighted in yellow. You are 6 months behind on tithes and program donations, she continued, waving the paper inches from my face. This cannot continue. I glanced at the numbers and saw exactly what she had chosen to include, and what she had carefully left off. We give in other ways, I replied quietly, feeling Noah press closer to my side. Karen laughed, a short, sharp sound. What, your famous Jell-O salad? She asked, loud enough that a couple in the doorway paused mid-conversation. God is not impressed by cheap desserts, Emma. This is a serious ministry, not a potluck line at a shelter. On Sunday morning, the attack moved to the very front doors of the church. The air was cold and bright, parking lot full of cars reflecting pale winter sunlight. Karen stationed herself at the entrance with a clipboard and a stack of printed notices, greeting each family with a hug before scanning the list. When she saw us approaching, Her expression shifted like a curtain dropping in a theater. "Noah, sweetheart, kids check-in is for registered, contributing families only," she announced sweetly, stepping in front of the door and blocking the way. Noah stopped so abruptly that his backpack swung forward and nearly hit him in the stomach. "We are registered," he whispered, looking up at me with wide, confused eyes. Karen shook her head, a sympathetic mask plastered over her face. "Your mother has fallen behind on her obligations," she said, emphasis heavy on the last word. "We cannot keep rewarding irresponsibility. There is a lovely public program downtown. Maybe that would be more appropriate." The couple behind us shifted awkwardly, and I could feel their pity like a physical weight pressing between my shoulder blades. I did something then that surprised even me. I stepped forward until we were almost nose to nose, my voice low and steady. "You are not going to talk about my son like he is a debt on a spreadsheet," I said, every word measured. For a second, something flickered in her eyes, hesitation, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Board meeting tomorrow night," she replied, lips curling. "We will see what the elders have to say about your attitude." Monday afternoon, I sat in Attorney Hayes's office again, the city skyline hazy behind his blinds. The same manila envelope lay open on his desk, pages spread out neatly like surgery tools. "You understand what this means if we push it?" he asked, tapping the deed that bore my grandmother's signature. "You will not just be hitting Karen. You will be shaking the entire foundation of that church." I pictured Noah's face outside the locked kids' check-in door and Karen's smug smile. My answer came out before I could overthink it. "Then maybe the foundation needs shaking," I said. We spent an hour going over every line. The 1987 sale. The clause about long-term lease. The renewal terms that had been quietly updated and signed every 10 years by men who never thought to tell the widow in the back pew that she owned the ground beneath their polished shoes. Hayes slid a new document toward me, an official notice drafted in language that felt colder than any sermon. "You do not have to use this," he reminded me. "But if she forces your hand, this will end the conversation." That evening, the board met in a paneled room off the sanctuary, and for the first time, I was invited only as an agenda item. I sat on a metal folding chair near the wall while Karen took her place at the polished conference table beside her husband. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, throwing harsh shadows across the wood. "We need to set a precedent," Karen began, folding her hands primly. "We cannot encourage families who treat this place like a free community center." Her husband nodded, flipping through a packet with my name printed in bold. Principal voices rose and fell around me. Phrases like discipline, membership review, program suspension floated through the air. No one mentioned the land. No one mentioned the trust. It was like the entire church had built itself on a secret they could not see even when the evidence sat 3 feet away in my purse. When they finally turned to me, Karen's eyes gleamed. "Emma, do you have anything to say for yourself tonight?" she asked, like a prosecutor offering a doomed defendant one last chance. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The manila envelope felt heavy against my hip. "No," I said softly. "Not tonight." A slow smile spread across her face, victory already settling in her shoulders. "Then the council will move forward with our recommendation," she announced, stacking her papers. "We will present it at the emergency congregational meeting this Friday. The church deserves transparency." As Noah and I walked to the car under the pale glow of the parking lot lights, he slipped his hand into mine. "Did we do something bad, Mom?" he asked. I looked back at the church building, at the white steeple that rose against the dark sky like a finger pointing at heaven. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "We just trusted the wrong people for too long." At home. I cleared a space at the kitchen table and laid out every document under the overhead light: deeds, tax records, correspondence with the trust, renewal notices, all bearing signatures and seals. The manila envelope that once felt like a shield now looked more like dynamite. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I stacked everything carefully back into place. Back then, staring at that pile of papers with my grandmother's name shining through the legalese, I still had no idea what Karen would dare to say in front of the entire congregation on Friday night, or how brutally she would miscalculate just how much power a poor church lady really held. At some point, the church has to say no to parasites, even if they hide behind a Bible and a sad little widow story. Karen's words rang out from the pulpit during Wednesday night service, dressed up as a general teaching about stewardship but aimed so squarely at me that several people in the front row shifted uncomfortably. She did not bother looking in my direction as she spoke, yet every time she said "some people," her gaze slid just far enough over the crowd that everyone knew exactly who she meant. Noah sat beside me in the pew, his shoulders hunched, his fingers tracing the edge of a torn hymnal page until it almost ripped. By the time the emergency congregational meeting notice went up on the church bulletin board, the whispers had become a steady hum. In the hallway after service, two women I used to sit with during Bible study lowered their voices as I approached. "I heard she has not given a dime in months," one murmured, eyes on the floor. "And still expects Noah in every program," the other replied, clutching her designer purse tighter. Karen glided past like a queen inspecting loyal subjects and gave me a quick, tight smile that felt more like a warning than a greeting. The phone call that finally shattered my last illusion of safety came early Thursday morning, when the sun had barely pushed its way through my thin curtains. "Emma, this is Mrs. Cooper from the Children's Ministry office," a nervous voice said as I sat on the edge of my bed. "I am so sorry, but Noah will need to sit out of Sunday school for now. There have been some concerns raised at the leadership level." I asked what concerns, but she stumbled over her words and never actually answered. When I hung up, Noah stood in the doorway in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Why are they mad at me, Mom?" he asked, and I had no good answer that would not poison his faith forever. Later that afternoon, I met with Attorney Hayes in his office again, the same manila folder now thicker with fresh photocopies and typed letters. Sunlight filtered through his blinds in sharp lines, striping the papers between us. "They are moving toward formal discipline and public shaming," he said quietly after reading the latest email I had forwarded from the church council. "They are counting on you being too intimidated to push back." He tapped the deed with his pen, right next to my grandmother's signature. "You realize that if you decide to act, this will not just embarrass their committee, it will fundamentally alter who controls that property." I stared at the documents, then at my reflection in the darkened window. "If I do nothing, they will drive my son out of the only community he knows," I said slowly. "If I do something, I might blow up that community for everyone." Hayes folded his hands and leaned back. "Sometimes," he replied, "the only way to fix a rotten structure is to let the rot show in daylight." He slid a freshly printed notice across the desk: formal language, legal references, deadlines. "This is a notice of lease review and potential termination. You do not have to serve it yet. But if they cross a line at that meeting, you will have options." On Friday afternoon, just hours before the congregational meeting, Karen demonstrated exactly how far she was willing to go. Noah and I had stopped by the church so he could drop off a drawing he made for his favorite youth leader, a simple picture of the sanctuary with a giant cross and smiling stick figures outside. We had almost reached the fellowship hall when Karen appeared at the top of the stairs like she had been waiting for us. "Emma," she called down, her heels clicking sharply on each step as she descended. "We are just about to set up for tonight's meeting. This is for members in good standing only." Her eyes flicked to the manila envelope peeking out of my bag. "I would hate for you to misunderstand your status here." I took a breath, carefully keeping my voice calm. "I am not planning to cause trouble," I said. "Noah just wanted to drop something off." Noah held up his drawing shyly, the paper shaking slightly in his hand. Karen's gaze slid over it once, then snapped back to my face. "Perhaps he should draw a different church," she replied, voice sweet but eyes cold. "One that can afford to carry his mother." She reached out and plucked the drawing from his hand, glancing at it with a little sniff. "We will see if there is space on the bulletin board," she added, folding it in half without even noticing the way Noah's face fell. That night at home, the apartment felt smaller than ever. Noah sat at the kitchen table picking at his dinner while I spread the documents out again under the overhead light. The trust papers. The lease agreement. The renewal notices signed by men who had probably never met my grandmother but had happily used her land for 3 decades. At the top of the stack, the new notice of lease review sat like a loaded weapon disguised as regular office paper. I kept seeing Noah's face when Karen folded his drawing without a second thought, the way his shoulders had curled inward like he was trying to disappear. Every cruel comment she had made suddenly lined up in my mind like soldiers, each one pushing us closer to some invisible edge. The scrape of her heel against my chair. The way she blocked doors. The tone she used when she said the word widow, like it was a bad smell. Mark, my ex, called that evening after hearing about the upcoming meeting from a mutual friend. "Just walk away, Emma," he said, frustration bubbling under his voice. "Find another church. It is not worth this kind of war." I looked at Noah, at the way he was pretending not to listen while his pencil dug grooves into the margins of his homework. "If I walk away now," I replied quietly, "what am I teaching our son? That bullies win if they wear pearls and carry Bibles?" Silence hung on the line for a moment before Mark sighed. "You really think you can win against them?" he asked. My eyes drifted to my grandmother's name on the deed, the ink slightly faded but undeniably real. "I do not have to win against them," I answered. "I just have to tell the truth in a room where they thought they controlled the story." When Noah fell asleep on the couch later, still in his church t-shirt, I carried him to bed and then returned to the kitchen. With hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, I placed the notice of lease review on top of the deed and slipped both into the manila envelope. Then I set my Bible on top of the envelope as a kind of anchor, even though the symbolism made me want to laugh. As I turned off the kitchen light, the whole apartment plunged into shadow except for one thin strip of street lamp glow across the table, illuminating the edge of the envelope. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and Noah's soft breathing down the hall. I had already decided that if Karen turned that meeting into a public execution instead of a conversation, I would not stay silent this time. I would not let her rewrite the story of my life, or my grandmother's legacy, just because she had a microphone and a talent for making people afraid. I just did not know yet that the entire sanctuary would soon be packed shoulder to shoulder, with phones recording from every angle, when I finally opened that envelope and started reading the truth out loud. "Before we begin, I think it is time we stop pretending this church is a free shelter for people who refuse to pull their weight. Karen's voice boomed through the sanctuary speakers, every syllable bouncing off the stained glass windows as if the building itself agreed with her. She stood at the pulpit under the huge wooden cross, microphone in hand, her navy dress and pearl earrings gleaming under the stage lights. The sanctuary was packed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with perfume, coffee, and the quiet rustle of Bible pages as people shifted in their seats to see who she would target next. Noah sat pressed against my side in the middle row, his fingers twisted into the fabric of my sleeve so tightly it hurt. Up front, the elders lined the first pew like a jury, their faces carefully neutral, their printed agendas resting on their knees. Phones glowed in several hands throughout the room, little squares of light aimed toward the pulpit. Even the choir stayed seated behind Karen, watching her like she was about to perform a solo. "We are gathered tonight," she continued, glancing down at her notes for dramatic effect, "because this body has carried too many spiritual and financial freeloaders for too long." Her eyes swept the room slowly, then landed right on me, holding my gaze for a long, cold second. "Some people think they can sit in the front row of God's blessings while paying for the cheap seats, if they pay at all." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone coughed. Somewhere behind me, a baby fussed and was quickly bounced back to quiet. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, but my hand stayed firmly on the manila envelope resting across my lap. The edges of the papers inside pressed against my skin like a reminder every time I shifted. Karen clicked a remote and a slide flashed onto the projector behind her, a chart labeled Giving versus Ministry Costs, red bars towering over small blue ones. "When one family refuses to contribute," she said, tapping the air, "everyone else pays the price. Programs get cut. Staff loses hours. Children suffer." Her voice softened briefly on the last word, the practiced crack of a skilled performer. "Is that what Christ wants for his church?" She clicked again, and this time a list of numbers appeared: pledges, tithes, offerings. At the very bottom, highlighted in harsh yellow, a line read Unpaid Pledges, Thompson. She did not say my name right away, letting the congregation read it for themselves first. I heard the intake of breath from 3 different directions at once. "Emma Thompson," she finally announced, savoring each syllable like it tasted sweet on her tongue. "For over a year, this church has carried your family. Discounts on every program. Free access to every meal. Special exceptions made every time you cried about your situation." She shook her head slowly, as if heartbroken. "And yet, there has been no accountability. No real effort to be part of the solution." I felt dozens of eyes swing toward me, heat rising up my neck. Noah leaned closer until his head rested against my shoulder, his voice a tremor barely louder than a breath. "Mom," he whispered, "please let's just go." My fingers tightened on the envelope. Karen set the remote down and picked up a folder from the pulpit. "The church council has prepared a recommendation," she said, flipping it open. "Effective immediately, we propose that Emma and her son be removed from all children's and family ministries until their financial standing is corrected. Additionally, we recommend a formal review of their membership status." "This is not punishment," she added, smiling a smile that did not reach her eyes. "This is stewardship." She looked directly at me again, tilting her head. "Emma, you are welcome to say a few words before we vote," she offered, the way a judge might allow a defendant to speak before sentencing. Several people shifted, curious. A few stared straight ahead, as if hoping not to be seen watching. For a moment, I considered standing up and walking out, just like Noah wanted. Let them have their vote. Let them keep their carefully curated kingdom untouched. I could already feel the relief that would come from not being the center of that many eyes, that many cameras, that much judgment. But then an image flashed in my mind, sharp and clear, Noah's drawing of the church folded in half in Karen's hand. The way he had asked if our car embarrassed God. The way he had turned red and small standing outside the Sunday school door while she blocked his way. I stood up slowly, the envelope balanced against my palm. The hush that fell over the sanctuary was almost physical, pressing against my chest as I stepped into the center aisle. Every step toward the front felt like walking uphill through water, my knees shaky but my spine strangely straight. When I reached the front, I did not climb up to the pulpit. Instead, I stopped at the base of the steps, turned to face the congregation, and lifted the envelope where everyone could see it. I do have something to say, I began, surprised by how steady my voice sounded through the microphone an elder hurriedly handed me. But it is not about my purse, or my car, or even about what I put in the offering plate. Karen frowned slightly, her grip tightening on her folder. Emma, she said, a warning threaded through my name. This is not. This, I cut in gently, raising the envelope a little higher, is about what my grandmother put on paper 38 years ago. A ripple moved through the room, confusion, curiosity, maybe a little impatience. I slid the first document out of the envelope, the crisp edges catching the light. This is the original deed for the land Gracewood Community Church sits on, I said, holding it up. Purchased in 1987 by Margaret Thompson and placed into the Thompson Family Trust. I walked up one step and handed the deed to the nearest elder, who took it reflexively, his brows knitting as he squinted at the seal. You will see, I continued, my voice gaining strength, that the buyer listed is not the church. It is my grandmother. And under her name, in the section labeled Successor Trustee, is mine. A low gasp spread like a wave, moving from the front pews to the back of the balcony. Someone muttered, "No way," under their breath. Another whispered, "Let me see that," leaning toward the elder with the paper. Karen's face had gone a shade paler, her eyes fixed on the deed as if she could will the ink to rearrange itself. I drew out the second document, the 1987 lease agreement, its edges yellowed but the type clear. This, I said, is the long-term lease agreement between the Thompson Family Trust and Gracewood Community Church. For 38 years, this church has paid an anonymous lease on this property. Every building, every classroom, every parking spot. I turned and spread the document across the pulpit for the elders to read, the microphone catching the faint crinkle of paper. The anonymous landlord you have been paying, I said, looking directly at Karen now, is my family. It has been my family since before you ever stepped into this sanctuary. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the baby in the back had gone silent, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Karen's mouth opened and closed once, but no sound came out. Her husband leaned forward, eyes scanning the document frantically, his lips moving as he read. I pulled out the final paper, the one Hayes had prepared. Fresh ink, crisp edges, heavy with possibility. And this, I said calmly, is a notice of lease review and potential termination. It states that if the terms of the lease are violated, the owner of the property has the right to end the agreement and reclaim full control of the land. I let the words hang there, then continued, keeping my voice low but clear. In 38 years, my family never used that power. We never raised the rent. We never interfered with how this church was run. We stayed anonymous because my grandmother believed the Lord's work was more important than her name on a plaque. I swallowed, feeling the emotion creep into my throat but refusing to let it choke me. But she also believed, I added, that if the people in charge of this place ever used it to hurt others instead of helping them, her granddaughter would know what to do. I turned from the papers and looked out at the rows of faces, some shocked, some guilty, some leaning forward like they were watching a movie. Noah's eyes shone with something new, something fierce, and my heart twisted all over again, this time in a different way. I have been called poor, a parasite, dead weight, I said, gesturing slightly toward Karen. My son has been blocked from classrooms, separated from his friends. Used as an example of what happens when you do not give enough. All while this church worshipped on land my family provided and protected without asking for anything in return, not even recognition. A murmur of protest rose from somewhere behind me, but it died quickly. Even the elders looked stunned, passing the documents between them with growing urgency. I took a breath and placed the notice on the pulpit beside the lease. I am not here to throw anyone out into the street tonight, I said. But I am here to make something very clear. I lifted my chin, hearing my grandmother's voice in my own. If this church continues to treat my son, or any other family, the way we have been treated, I will sign this notice. And Gracewood Community Church will no longer have the right to meet on this property. Karen finally found her voice, though it came out thinner than before. This is manipulation, she stammered, stepping closer to the pulpit. You forged those papers. This is some kind of scam. God will not be mocked by. Those are county records, I interrupted quietly, nodding toward the elders. Anyone can verify them on Monday morning. Or you can call Attorney Hayes right now, his number is at the bottom. Phones were already out in full view now, not just recording but searching. I saw one of the board members typing frantically, another scrolling through the county website, his eyes growing wider with each second. Karen turned to the congregation, desperate. Are we really going to let one bitter woman hold this entire church hostage? She demanded, voice rising. She is trying to blackmail us. This is spiritual warfare. You cannot believe. Her words cut off mid-sentence when one of the elders stood up slowly, holding the deed in his shaking hand. Karen, he said, his voice tired, the seal is real. The signatures are real. The parcel number matches our records. He looked from the paper to the congregation, grim. It appears we have been tenants of the Thompson Family Trust since 1987. The sanctuary erupted, not in cheers or applause, but in a chaotic storm of whispers, exclamations, and the frantic tapping of screens. People twisted in their seats to talk to their neighbors, others just stared at me like they were seeing me for the very first time. On the pew where Noah sat, his small shoulders finally relaxed. He looked at me with something like awe and relief mixed together. Mom, he breathed, just loud enough for me to hear over the noise, does that mean this is ours? I did not answer him yet. I just reached out and squeezed his hand, my gaze never leaving the woman who had called me poor in front of this very congregation. Her face had gone almost gray, her lips pressed into a thin line, but I could see something sparking behind her eyes, a frantic, desperate calculation as the power she was used to wielding slipped through her fingers in front of everyone. For the first time since I had known her, Karen Whitaker looked truly afraid. And none of us in that sanctuary, not the elders flipping through legal documents, not the parents frantically checking tax records on their phones, not even me, had any idea what her final, desperate move would be before that night was over. For a moment after the elder's words, the sanctuary sounded like a storm trapped in a glass box. People were talking over one another, chairs scraped, phones buzzed with incoming messages as the news rippled out beyond the four walls. Karen's face went from pale to flushed and back again in the space of a few heartbeats. She gripped the edge of the pulpit so tightly her knuckles turned white, her papers trembling visibly. "I will not let you destroy this church with your lies," she shouted suddenly, her voice cracking through the sound system in a burst of feedback that made people flinch. Before anyone could react, she lunged toward the front of the stage, reaching for the projector cart like she meant to rip the cords out of the wall. One of the tech volunteers stepped back just in time as she grabbed the HDMI cable and yanked with both hands, sending the connection screen flickering and the laptop sliding dangerously close to the edge. "Karen, stop," one of the elders barked, stepping forward, but she was already turning toward me, eyes wild. "This is witchcraft," she cried, pointing a shaking finger in my direction. "You bewitched them with money and legal jargon. None of this changes the fact that you are a taker, Emma. A user. You and your son." "That is enough," the senior pastor said quietly, but this time there was steel in his voice that had been missing all the other times he watched her cut me down. He crossed the stage, took the microphone gently but firmly from her hand, and passed it to another elder. Then he turned to face the congregation, his expression grave. "Everyone, please take your seats. We are going to restore order." The elders did not shout. They did not grandstand. Instead, 3 of them formed a small huddle near the front pew, papers spread between them, the deed, the lease, the notice, the copies someone had already pulled up on a phone from the county records. After a few minutes, one of them walked to the pulpit with the microphone, his shoulders heavy. "For tonight," he said slowly, choosing each word like it might break in his mouth, "this meeting is adjourned. There will be no vote on the Thompson family's standing. There will be no vote on their removal from ministries." He looked in my direction, then swept his gaze across the restless congregation. "We have just learned information that fundamentally changes our understanding of this church's relationship to its property and to one of its members. We need time to confirm everything and to seek legal counsel." Someone called out from the back, "So is she telling the truth?" The elder held up the deed, the county seal catching the light. "As far as we can see tonight," he replied, "yes. These documents appear to be genuine. Gracewood has been leasing this land from the Thompson Family Trust for 38 years. You could feel the shift, small at first, like the way a room changes when someone opens a window." People who had been leaning away from me now leaned forward. A woman who used to sit with Karen's group turned in the pew and gave me a searching look, like she was mentally replaying every time Karen had called me poor Emma in her presence. Karen tried to speak again, but this time when she reached for the microphone, the pastor stepped between her and the stand. "Karen," he said softly but firmly, "go home. We will talk later." For a second I thought she might fight him right there in front of everyone, but then something in her posture collapsed. She spun on her heel and marched down the side aisle, head held high, jaw clenched. No one reached out to touch her arm as she passed. No one whispered admiration. A path simply opened, and she moved through it alone. When the meeting finally broke apart into knots of murmuring people, Noah and I stayed seated for a while. He leaned his head against my shoulder, exhausted. Eventually, a shadow fell across our row. I looked up to see the senior pastor standing there without his usual easy smile. "Emma," he said, voice low so only we could hear. "I should have stepped in sooner. I am Deeply sorry for the ways this church has failed you and your son. It was not everything, but it was something. We are not leaving, I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my tone. Not tonight. Not because she pushed us. He nodded slowly, like he understood that this was as much about Noah as it was about me. You should expect a call from our lawyer, he added. And from the denomination. There will be conversations about the lease, about the trust, about how we move forward. But you need to know, you are not the problem here. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet fallout rather than fireworks. The church board announced an internal review of all leadership roles. Karen's name disappeared from the bulletin, first from the women's ministry director line, then from the list of those leading prayer. The reserved parking spot she and her husband had claimed for years suddenly had a plain white sign that just said visitor in block letters. She stopped showing up in person, but her presence lingered in the stories people started sharing with each other once the fear loosened its grip. At Wednesday night dinners, I overheard murmurs. She screamed at me in the nursery one time because my baby's bottle spilled on the carpet. She told my husband we were dragging down the offering average. I never felt good enough to serve here because of the way she looked at my clothes. One by one, the moments that had seemed isolated and personal when we were all standing alone in them now wove together into a pattern too obvious to ignore. Meanwhile, on the legal side, life looked very different from the view of the trust office. Attorney Hayes met with the denominational lawyer, the board, and me in a conference room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. The lease is still valid, he explained carefully, tapping the document. But your client, he nodded toward me, has every right to revisit the terms. Especially if the environment is hostile toward her family. The denominational representative, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, leaned forward. We do not want to lose this property, he admitted. Moving a congregation is costly spiritually and financially. What would it take for you to feel safe here again, Ms. Thompson? It was strange hearing them ask me that, after so many years of acting as if my feelings were an afterthought. I thought about Noah, about the way he had started drawing churches again, this time with open doors. First, I said slowly, there needs to be an official statement, from the pulpit, that what happened to us was wrong. Not just, regrettable. Wrong. The pastor nodded immediately. Done, he said. Next Sunday. Second, I continued, there has to be a formal process so no family ever gets treated this way again because someone with influence decides they do not belong. Clear guidelines. Real accountability. The denominational lawyer scribbled notes. We can work on that, he agreed. And third, I said, glancing at Hayes, who gave me a barely perceptible nod, the lease needs amending. I could have demanded control over everything, the power to approve every decision, the right to dangle the threat of termination over their heads whenever I felt slighted. Instead, I took a breath and chose something else. I want a clause that dedicates a portion of the lease income directly to scholarships and support for families who cannot afford full program costs. In my grandmother's name. Quietly. Permanently. There was a moment of silence as they processed that. The denominational representative smiled faintly. I think, he said, your grandmother would be proud of you. As for Karen, the last time I saw her was in the grocery store a month after the meeting. She was standing in the canned goods aisle, staring at a row of generic soup like she could not quite remember why she was there. She looked smaller without her entourage, her makeup a little uneven, her hair pulled back without the usual careful curls. For a second, our eyes met. I expected anger, or at least the brittle defensiveness I had seen so many times before. Instead, what I saw was something close to panic, washed through with humiliation. She grabbed a random can, did not even look at the label, and shoved it into her cart like she needed to be doing something, anything, other than standing still in front of me. "You happy now?" she muttered, not quite under her breath. "You ruined my life." I considered her for a moment, then shook my head. "No, Karen," I said quietly. "You built your life on treating people like they were beneath you." I just turned on the lights. She flinched like I had slapped her, then pushed her cart away, wheels squeaking all the way around the corner. I did not follow. Whatever came next for her, whatever consequences rippled out into her marriage, her social circle, her sense of self, that was between her, her conscience, and the God whose name she had used like a weapon. At church, things were not magically perfect after that. There were awkward Sundays, people who did not know whether to hug me or apologize or pretend nothing had happened. Some families quietly slipped away to other congregations, uncomfortable with the idea that the poor widow they had pitied owned the land beneath their feet. Others stayed and slowly began to trust that maybe this place could be different. On the first Sunday after everything was finalized, the pastor stood at the pulpit and looked out at us with tired, honest eyes. "We failed Emma and Noah," he said plainly, without spin. "We let gossip and pride and fear dictate how we treated one of our own. That is sin, not stewardship. It grieves me, and it grieves God." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We are going to do better. Not because we are afraid of losing a building, but because we are afraid of losing our souls." Noah squeezed my hand and leaned his head on my arm. When the worship team started to play, he sang louder than I had ever heard him sing before. The Thompson Family Trust lease stayed in place, amended just the way I had asked. Families whose names had quietly sat at the bottom of giving charts for years began receiving quiet notes offering help with camp fees and retreat costs. No fanfare, no public shaming, just a simple, "We are glad you are here." My grandmother's name was never put on a plaque, but I felt her presence every time a child walked through those doors without wondering whether they really belonged. As for me, I stopped sitting in the back. Not because I wanted to flaunt anything, but because I finally believed I had as much right to be there as anyone else. Sometimes I still carried the envelope with the deed and lease to big meetings, not as a threat, but as a reminder, to them and to myself, that power does not always look like we think it does. It does not always wear pearls or drive a Lexus. Sometimes it shows up in thrift store cardigans and old cars, waiting patiently until the right moment to speak. If there is a moral to all of this, it is not that money makes you untouchable or that revenge is the sweetest hymn. It is that the truth has a way of surviving underneath everyone's assumptions, waiting for someone brave, or desperate, enough to uncover it. Bullies thrive in the dark. They shrink under documents, under facts, under the steady gaze of people who refuse to look away. So, what about you? Have you ever watched someone wield status or faith or money like a weapon against people who had less? Have you ever kept a secret that could change everything if you finally said it out loud? Tell your story. Someone sitting in the back row right now might need to hear exactly what happened when you decided you had been quiet long enough.